Hi, everyone. In this episode, we delve into chilling accounts of creatures so bizarre and elusive that they will challenge your understanding of the natural world. Bundle up as we hear the chilling details, examine the evidence, and attempt to unravel the truth behind these enigmatic creatures. So, if you're in it to win it, please squash that subscribe button and let's get into the stories. This happened to me a few years back when I lived near the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. I lived alone in this little 2-bedroom bungalow out in the middle of nowhere, basically just a speck of dirt and a handful of pebbles in a big old desert bowl under nothing but sky. I'd go into town for groceries or whatever, but mostly it was me on my little plot of land peppered with brittlebush, saguaro, and the occasional fox or coyote scurrying by. I loved it there. The quietness is like a living thing when you're in the desert. Sort of like your own heart when it beats so loudly you can hear it in your ears. But there's beauty in it too. The sunsets, even the desolation. You can't find that kind of thing in the city. Some nights I'd lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. The isolation took some getting used to, but it was good for my soul. It was peaceful most days, but every once in a while I got this feeling in the pit of my stomach. I can only describe it as unease. The thing no one ever tells you about the desert is that when you're alone out there, you can almost feel the eyes on you, even when you can't see them. It's like an itch on a phantom limb you can't scratch. Something's out there, you know it, but you just can't see it. I always manage to keep myself busy during the day. It's easy to retreat to normality when daylight's on your side. You work, you eat, you sleep. But as the desert day bleeds into twilight, that's when mind starts to play tricks on you. I'd find myself stopping in the middle of whatever I was doing just to listen, straining to hear something in the silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me just around the corner. Whatever it was always just out of view. The smell is what I remember the most about it. There was always this scent I clocked in the early evenings. It was earthy, like overturned soil with the musky scent of rain or decaying leaves. It was strange and seemed to come out of nowhere. It drifted with the breeze. It was fleeting, present one moment and gone the next. It made my heart hammer in my chest whenever it showed up, and then came the laughter. This is going to sound insane, but I swear there was laughter floating in on the breeze. Not a person's laughter, and not the coyote's distant screeching either. It was different somehow, but I couldn't place it. My pattern didn't change despite these weird occurrences. I'd keep to my routines, tend to my garden, fix the issues in the house, cook my meals, and try not to let the oppression of the night get to me. I told myself it was just nerves, just loneliness playing tricks. Fear is a funny thing. It makes you believe in the unexplainable. I thought I was going mad, but little did I know my ordeal was just beginning. The strange occurrences built up gradually. One night, the wind howling outside my home was different. Wrong. It wasn't any animal sound that I could identify either. There was something out there, but what? I didn't have a clue. The following morning, I found animal tracks circling my house. They were much larger than those of a coyote. They looked canine at first glance, but upon further inspection, they were anything but. They looked almost like man's footprints that somehow morphed into a wolf's. The eeriest thing happened one stark, moonlit night. I was sure of what I saw, even though it made no sense. There was a shape near the far boundary of my land. It stood upright, hunched, and humanoid in nature. I'd seen enough wolves and stray dogs to know this silhouette was something else entirely. It was solitary and slender, and for a horrifying moment, I thought it was a person. I grabbed my gun and flashlight and cautiously stepped outside. I followed the figure with the beam of my flashlight and watched in horror as it seemed to change right before my eyes. The human figure lost its defined edges, becoming a fluid, shifting form, altering between human and animal. Fur sprouted unnaturally, and it began to crawl on all fours, a twisted illusion that chilled me to my core. When it looked up, illuminated by the moonlight, the eyes glowed a vile yellow, unlike any animal I'd seen before. My heart pounded in my chest. In that moment, nothing felt real. I stood rooted in place, too terrified to move, breathless. The loaded gun felt so insignificant in my sweaty palms. Could this thing even be killed? Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. I was left alone under the vast sky, my heart pounding a lonely rhythm in the silence. It was no surprise that I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat huddled in my living room, every creak of the settling house sending my heart rate skyrocketing. The sun rose without the creature returning, but the fear, the brutal reality of what I saw remained. I felt sick to my stomach whenever I thought about it. I had heard stories of these creatures, these beings. I always chalked them up to myths and ghost stories. To think they were actually real completely shattered my sense of reality. It was a horrifyingly haunting thought that kept ringing alarm bells in the back of my mind. I questioned whether I should stay, whether the spell of isolation cast by the desert was worth the terror of the unknown. I haven't seen the creature again since that night, but the fear of its presence is always there. Every so often, I still encounter that overpowering, musky smell and hear the unnatural laughter that sends chills down my spine. I can't look at the desert or listen to the wind at night the same way anymore. It's all tainted by the encounter that night, by the frightful creature that may still be watching, waiting out there in the shadows. I had an encounter with something odd a couple of years back. I was vacationing down in South America. Despite not being the Indiana Jones type, I've got a certain soft spot for adventure. And I figured while I'm near the Amazon rainforest, I might as well do as the adrenaline junkies do. The travel brochures really sell you on the idea hard. They boast of great hiking trails, exotic wildlife, and untouched nature. I decided to take a chance. So there I was, deep in the heart of the rainforest. I remember the atmosphere like it was yesterday. There was a wall of sound created by the numerous animals, birds, and insects that called the forest home. Everything was green, and in some places, the foliage was so thick that it blocked out the sunlight. The air was thick, hot, and tasted like rain. It was exhilarating, and I thought, man, this is it. This is the adventure I always wanted. The first hints of mystery began to show up when I noticed something unusual off one of the beaten tracks. It was a rocky outcrop that seemed oddly out of place in the green expanse. I got closer, and I could see that it was not just a rock, but the mouth of a hidden cave. The entrance was concealed by dense foliage. There was just something about that cave that piqued my interest. Now I know what you're thinking. Everyone knows not to go off exploring caves unsupervised. But the call of the wild had a firm grip on me, and it just felt like something was pulling me towards it. Maybe it was the thrill of the unknown, or perhaps just foolhardiness, but whatever it was, I decided to investigate. With a flashlight in one hand and a kind of nervous excitement bubbling up inside me, I carefully made my way into the darkness. The cave was like a whole new world, and every echo, every drip of water was amplified in the cavernous darkness. The walls of the cave glistened in the light from my flashlight. It felt ominous, but I kept going. Venturing deeper in, I suddenly stumbled upon something strange. I bent down to see what it was and found something lying on the musty cave floor. It was a strange, towering artifact that sparkled in the glow of my flashlight. It was clearly alien to the cave environment and too geometric to be a natural formation. So there I stood, deep in an unknown cave, gazing at this enigmatic object. It was about 4 feet tall, with multiple panels fused together, each engraved with symbols that bore no resemblance to anything human-made. But what was even more startling was a strange, unearthly hum that seemed to be coming from it. It was like some muted, thunderous rumble coming from deep underground. That's the only way I can think to describe it. But the strangeness did not end there. The very air around the artifact gave off a low vibration and an unnatural cold. The closer I got to it, the colder it felt, almost as if I was standing in an open fridge. Overwhelmed by the entire surreal experience, I gingerly reached a hand out to touch the strange thing. when suddenly I was interrupted by the shrillest sound I've ever heard. It was like the noise of tires squealing on a wet road. It was ear-splittingly loud. I spun around and my flashlight caught a group of beings bathed in an eerie, phosphorescent light around the strange artifact. No doubt about it, I was looking at alien beings. They had to be close to 6 feet tall. Their bodies were thin and almost skeletal, like there was no body fat on them at all. They had these large, black, oval-like eyes and incredibly short mouths, almost like slits. I didn't see a nose on any of them. They turned towards me, causing my heart to hitch up in my chest. They didn't speak or even attempt to, but I knew I was unwelcome there. The air around them was more frigid. I started to slowly back away. I didn't turn around, not wanting to take my eyes off these things, but I wanted to get out of there as quickly as I could. I stumbled my way backwards out of the cave without the creatures lending chase. Looking back, I honestly don't think they wanted to harm me. They just wanted me to leave. I managed to escape the cave and started running until I reached the safety of the main trail. It's been 2 years since that day, and I am no closer to understanding what was happening in that cave than I was the moment I saw them. Was that thing part of a ship? Were they stranded here? Or were they living in that cave? I've heard stories about cave-dwelling monsters, but I don't think that is what I saw that day. These things weren't from this world. I knew that much, but the whole situation was baffling. It just doesn't make any sense. They let me go without any incident and trusted that I wouldn't go report them to the authorities, or come back with reinforcements. Or maybe they just simply weren't afraid of that possibility. Whatever they were and however they got here, I don't think I'll ever find out. I just hope that my story maybe reaches someone else that shares a similar experience, so that I can know for certain that I'm not crazy. If you've ever spent a summer night working at a lonely gas station in the middle of nowhere in Texas, then you might be able to relate. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and honestly, some nights, there's a kind of peace to it. Leaves a man a lot of time to think. This unbelievable encounter happened about 3 years ago now. The station I worked at is a few miles out of town. Things work mostly on the honor system late at night. Gives local folks a chance to fuel up after other places are closed, and we occasionally get some lost tourists lured in by the light from the canopy over the pumps. It's a slow job, but cleaning up and restocking shelves gives me something to do amidst the boring hours. That particular night, I was listening to an oldies radio station and wiping down the soda machine nozzles when the air changed. It was like suddenly everything just felt wrong. I've been in some pretty sketchy situations out here in the night shift, but I've never quite felt anything like that. Typically, I'm not easily spooked, but this had me on edge. I've grown pretty comfortable with the isolation out here and the long stretches of quiet. Not much gets me worried. Out of nowhere, for just a brief moment, the natural sounds of Texas nights ceased completely. The crickets, the breeze rustling the leaves outside, it all just stopped. Everything fell quiet. There was an undeniable chill in the air, but I shrugged it off and got back to work. It wasn't long, though, before more strange things started to happen. I was behind the counter counting the packs of cigarettes for inventory when I heard a noise. It was kind of like a scratching sound coming from near the cooler. I figured it was just a raccoon or something. Not sure I should be admitting this, but sometimes they would get in the outdoor cooler on a late-night search for food. It didn't happen very often, but it wasn't too unusual either. With the broom in hand, I strolled towards the cooler, humming some half-forgotten tune and preparing to shoo away whatever pest had made its way in. I remember seeing that the door to the cooler was slightly ajar, which was strange since I had made sure everything was closed up tight after restocking it. The scratching had stopped by then, but there was a new sound replacing it. It was like a low, rumbling growl. I couldn't place it as anything I had heard before. When I pushed the cooler door open, a cold gust of air greeted me, but there was a strange smell there too. It was like a mix between a wet dog and the stench of rotting meat. It sent a shiver down my spine. I flicked the switch to the overhead lights, only to see them flicker and fail. With only the dim light from the station cutting a narrow path into the cooler, I could make out a shape at the back. It looked like there was something in there moving. It was tall, easily over 6 feet, and hunched over. It was standing on 2 legs, but I couldn't make out much more detail. Was it a person? I couldn't tell in the low light. It didn't look like it, though. Whatever it was seemed to have rough, uneven skin, like the bark of a tree or maybe. And remember, I'm trying to rationalize a very odd situation here, like the scaled skin of a reptile. As I slowly backed away, it turned towards me. 2 glowing yellow eyes peered out from the cooler, reflecting back at me with an intelligence that set my senses alight. Everything inside of me started screaming at me to bolt. It felt like I was prey, backed into a corner by a predator way out of my league. The fear I felt in that moment was primal. I knew I needed to get away from this creature. Suddenly, a low, unearthly growl echoed from the creature, reverberating against the cooler's walls. It seemed to echo within my very chest. Its eyes burned into mine as it slowly straightened, its hunched figure unfurling to its full height. The overhead light from the gas station flickered to life, illuminating the grotesque form. I was right. Its skin was scaled like some sort of reptile. It almost glistened under the bright lights above us, but I was in no position to appreciate its beauty. The thing was something straight out of a horror movie, if you ask me. Its massive figure had a vaguely human shape. The claws on its lean arms ended in long, wickedly sharp black talons. The face was uncannily lizard-like, like a monitor, if you've ever seen one. Its pupils were just tiny slits in its yellow eyes. If I didn't know better, I'd say I was standing face to face with a dinosaur. But that couldn't be possible, could it? With a surge of adrenaline, I stumbled back, dropping the broom and turning to bolt towards the station. The sound of the creature lurching towards me seemed unusually quiet for something that size. In pure terror, I managed to stumble my way back into the station, slamming the door shut behind me. I stood there, gasping for air, staring at the door and bracing for impact. But it never came. The courage to move came only after a few tense minutes of silence. I bolted the door shut and fell to my knees, unable to shake the image of those piercing yellow eyes. The remainder of the night passed in a blurry daze, marked with checks on the bolted door and anxious peeks out of the window. Nothing unusual happened after that encounter, yet the feeling of terror lingered in the corners of the station. In the safety of daylight, I rationalized the episode as a product of my overworked mind. Sometimes the night shift gets to you. That's the only logical explanation I can come up with. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the intensity of those moments. The terror felt too real, too deeply ingrained to be just a figment of my imagination. I'm sharing my story with you today, hedging my bets on someone out there who might have had a similar terrifying encounter and thinking they're alone. Or maybe they're just insane. If it's the former, then they're not alone. If it's the latter, well, maybe we're insane together. Because I have seen it too. I was just a teenager back then, barely out of high school with dreams of college and beyond. It was the summer of 2004 in my home state of Florida. It was a time of sunshine, beaches, and teenage adventures. My friends and I found a thrill in exploring places we weren't meant to go. Typical teenager stuff. Looking back, I suppose we thought we were invincible. Our stupidity outreached our common sense more often than not. We had decided to explore an abandoned amusement park that had been repossessed by nature. It was out in one of the most remote parts of Tampa, where the wilderness brushes against the edges of the city. It can get a little creepy out there at night, but that wasn't going to stop us. We were fearless, or so we thought. There were 5 of us: myself, Troy, Max, Carrie, and Lyle. It was about 11 at night when we started our walk from the edge of town towards the amusement park. Everyone was excited. We were talking, laughing, and poking fun at each other. The thought of potential dangers wasn't in any of our minds. When we reached the park, it was eerily silent except for the soft chirping of summer crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. The shadowy husk of the once thriving amusement park evoked a sense of foreboding and thrill all at once. The skeletal structure of a carousel and the looming shadows of the silent roller coasters cast eerie shapes against the moonlit sky. We split into 2 groups to explore, with Max, Troy, and me going towards the back of the park, while Lyle and Carrie stayed towards the entrance. It was supposed to be fun, and it was at first. We noisily rambled around, checking out the long abandoned rides and stands. Everything was covered with a thick layer of foliage. Vines crawled up the skeletal metallic structures of the coasters. The once cheerful, bright colors were long faded and replaced by the uniformity of rust and weathered paint. The place was drowned in an eerie silence. We thought it was cool. As we ventured deeper, a strange, unidentifiable noise caught our attention. It was light, irregular, like something scratching or scraping at wood. We brushed it off as some type of animal that must have made a home in one of the abandoned structures. Probably a raccoon. There's enough of them around. But in the quiet dark, it was hard to ignore the reality that we weren't alone. As the night grew darker, the noises seemed to get louder, filling the air with an eerie sense of anticipation. It was a soft, clicking sound. I think by then we all knew it wasn't a friendly raccoon, but no one wanted to be the first to admit they were scared. The undeniable feeling of eyes watching us from the shadows began to make my skin crawl. There seemed to be a palpable shift in the mood of the park, as if the innocent fun of trespassing into a forbidden playground had quickly transformed into something more sinister. There was something out there with us, something that shouldn't be. I fought the rising dread, focusing on the thrill of adventure I had craved earlier in the day. Suddenly, my foot hit something, causing a startled shriek to escape my lips. Max and Troy whipped their flashlights towards my feet, just as I did. There, lying in the leaf-scattered pavement, was an unearthly, pale, and gaunt-looking hand. It was human-like, but the skin was too stretched, too pale, and almost translucent in the moonlight. My first thought was that maybe it was some part of a costume or a scary prank. But then it moved, with a speed that was completely unnatural. A creature erupted from the shadows. It was humanoid, but it didn't stand upright. It crawled like an animal. The clicking noise we had been hearing turned into something like snarling chatter. Its teeth were like dry sticks clattering together. It was a disgusting thing, gangly as if malnourished. Its naked body was the same cadaverous shade as the hand. The creature's skin was so thin that you could see the faint outlines of its organs in its belly. It turned its face towards us, and what we saw, the blood in our veins, turned ice cold. Its eyes were pools of darkness, taking up most of its face. No pupils, no irises, just black. It had no nose, not even a bridge, just a flat expanse of skin stretching to the open, gaping mouth that clicked and clattered. It was something straight out of a nightmare. In my panic, I had somehow managed to pull out my phone, clumsily hitting the button to catch this nightmare on video. It all felt surreal, as if we were living inside a horror movie. Simultaneously, we all scrambled towards the entrance. The creature, with its strange clicking and nightmarish face, didn't appear to chase us. Rather, it watched. Its large eyes reflected in the flickering beams from our flashlights as we sprinted towards the park's entrance. We ran like our lives depended on it. Lyle and Carrie saw us running and, realizing something was horribly wrong, started towards us. We finally made it out of the amusement park and reached the highway, leaving that demonic thing behind us. The morning after felt hardest. The video on my cell phone served as a grim reminder that it hadn't been a nightmare. We tried to tell others and even show them the videos, but everyone dismissed us. They laughed and said, "Nice try." They thought it was a prank, that we created the pale creature in the night. It was frustrating at first. No one believed us. No one. I still have the video, but you can't make anything out. Cell phone cameras weren't the best quality back then, but I kept it. It serves as my reminder that there are things out there that defy explanation and understanding. I want to tell you about this time my wife and I decided to take the family on a vacation in New Jersey. You know how family vacations can be, sometimes great, sometimes not. This one was memorable and not in a good way. It was about 5 years ago, in the heart of summer. We were driving down the dusty back roads of southern Jersey. The pine barrens were all around us. In retrospect, deciding to venture off the conventional vacation route might not have been the best decision. But then adventure and new experiences have always drawn me like a bee to honey. Plus, with the kids off school and chattering in the back seat, an off-the-grid day was looking more and more enticing. Now, standing in front of the pine barrens for a moment, it felt like stepping into another world. The weathered trees, the chirping cicadas, everything about the scenery exuded an eerie sense of beauty. No offense to the garden parks and city tours, but nature has a way of touching you that no man-made structure can. So, with our sandwiches, some fruit, and a couple of bottles of water, we decided to head deeper in, disregarding the little voice inside that said we were treading into unknown territory. At first, everything was beautiful. We had made a little picnic site, and the noise of the kids echoed through the dense woods. The day had gone perfectly by all accounts, and that little warning voice in my head was nothing but a distant memory. But as the sun began to descend and we started our hike back, we realized we had strayed too far. The well-worn trail we had followed was now a web of confusion, and there were no clear markers or signs in sight. An initial sense of fun and laughter soon morphed into a creeping worry, and for good reasons. We were lost in the Pine Barrens. If you're not familiar with the area, you should know that this isn't somewhere you want to be lost in. The forest is so dense that hikers have been found dead not 20 yards from the marked trail. They got lost and couldn't get out. It's like a maze out there on a good day. The quarrels began soon, unavoidable under the stress. My wife and I snapped at the smallest errors in our futile attempts at navigation. Anticipation and excitement had evaporated, leaving behind a stale aftermath of unease. Our kids, who merely half an hour ago were overjoyed with their adventure, were now huddled close to us, fear visible in their innocent eyes. I knew I had made a mistake and I needed to figure a way out of the woods, and fast. It was our eldest child, Noah, who first caught sight of it, or rather, its glowing eyes through the dense woods. His grip on my hand tightened, and with a sputtered breath whispered, "Dad, what is that?" I saw them right away. Those demonic glowing eyes pierced through the dusk like searchlights. Whatever it was big, almost 6 feet tall by the look of it. I could make out its skeletal exterior vaguely in the diminishing light. It had the body of a deer almost, but its face was something else entirely. It had this bizarre, goblin-esque head and what appeared to be 2 wings erupting out of its back. It was just standing there amidst the undergrowth, watching us. I had heard stories of creatures like this in the barrens, but I had never believed them until that day. The creature kept its distance, almost as if it were simply observing us. It kept itself concealed in the shadows. None of us would have even noticed it if not for the eyes. Our decision to tread lightly, to gently retreat, was second-guessed when a primeval roar filled the air. My wife gasped, the kids screamed, and the petrifying echo of that sound overwhelmed the barriers of our composure. The creature shifted from its hidden spot and moved into the light. It had the head of what looked like a horse, but distorted, twisted into something much more hideous. Its eyes still glowed that unholy red, and from its mouth hung a long, slithering tongue. Its body was a nightmarish compilation, like it was made of several different animals. It rose its wings in a terrifying display. They were membranous and bat-like. The smell of sulfur was thick in the air. It smelled like there was something burning, and yet I could see no signs of fire. There was no doubt in any of our minds. This was the Jersey Devil, and I can say it has been aptly named. The beast looked like it came straight out of hell itself. Suddenly, it bolted at us, and that was the breaking point. We turned around and ran. Stumbling over tree roots, crashing through branches, we dug up every ounce of energy to create distance from that monstrosity. I don't know how we managed, but we ended up reaching the edge of the woods. The car wasn't too far away, and we made a run for it. In the days that followed, our escape became our sanity. We'd escaped with no major injuries, save a scraped knee for Noah and torn clothes for the rest of us. You can imagine the gratitude we felt for making it out of there alive. But the memory of the encounter lingered like a nightmarish specter. To this day, our family trips are carefully planned. We stick to the enclosed safety of theme parks or city vacations. We've learned our lesson the hard way. There are some territories that are best left unexplored. The memory of the eyes glowing in the darkness, the terrifying roar, is something all of us would rather forget. It's been tough on the kids as we try to convince them that monsters aren't real when we know full well they are.